North Korea's geography is so strange that it explains almost everything about how the country operates, and the facts you are about to learn will completely change how you understand the world's most secretive nation. We are talking about a country where 80% of the land is mountains nobody can live on, where the capital city was artificially built in the wrong location, and where geography has trapped 26 million people in a system they cannot escape. And it all started with how a peninsula got divided by two superpowers who drew a line without understanding what they were doing. Here is what nobody tells you about North Korea's geography. The country is not just isolated by politics. It is isolated by mountains, rivers, and terrain that make it almost impossible to access or escape. The northern border with China is defined by two major rivers and some of the most rugged mountains in Asia. The southern border is the demilitarized zone, the most heavily militarized border on Earth. The east and west coasts are blocked by mountains that drop straight into the sea. North Korea is basically a natural fortress, and geography made it that way. Let's start with the most important geographic fact. North Korea is 80% mountains. Only about 20% of the country is flat enough for agriculture or cities. That 20% is split between narrow coastal plains and a few river valleys. This is critical because it means North Korea cannot feed itself. There is not enough arable land to grow food for 26 million people, which is why the country has faced famines and food shortages and depends heavily on imports and aid to survive. The mountains aren't just hills. We're talking about ranges that rise to 9,000 feet, with peaks that are snow-covered year-round. The Hamgyong Range in the northeast and the Nangnim Range in the center cut the country into isolated regions that are incredibly difficult to connect. Building roads and railways through these mountains is expensive and complicated, which is why North Korea's infrastructure is so underdeveloped. Geography literally made it hard to build a functioning modern state. But here's where it gets weird. Pyongyang, the capital, is not where a capital city should logically be. Normally, capitals are built at strategic locations, major rivers, ports, or crossroads of trade routes. Pyongyang is inland on the Taedong River, which is not a major port. The city was rebuilt from scratch after the Korean War because the original city was completely destroyed by American bombing. North Korea chose to rebuild Pyongyang as a showcase capital, even though geographically it makes no sense. And you know what is crazy? Pyongyang is a fake city in many ways. The population is carefully controlled, and only the most loyal citizens are allowed to live there. Many buildings are designed to look impressive from the outside, but they are empty or partially constructed shells. The city exists to project power and loyalty, not because geography naturally made it a hub. That is what happens when politics overrides geographic logic. Now, let's talk about the northern border with China, because this is where North Korea's geography becomes a prison. The Yalu River and the Tumen River form most of the border, and these rivers are wide, cold, and heavily patrolled. The only way to cross is by swimming, which is dangerous and often fatal, or by bribing guards, which is risky and expensive. Beyond the rivers are mountains that make escape routes even harder. But here is the thing, despite all this, people still try to escape across the northern border because it is the only option. The DMZ to the south is impossible. It is 160 miles long, 2.5 miles wide, and filled with landmines, barbed wire, armed guards, and surveillance systems. Nobody crosses the DMZ successfully. So North Koreans who want to escape go north through the mountains and rivers into China, hoping to eventually make it to South Korea through a third country. Geography makes this escape route incredibly dangerous. The border regions are remote, mountainous, and freezing in winter. Temperatures drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. The terrain is unforgiving, and if China catches you, they send you back to North Korea, where defectors face labor camps or execution. Geography does not just isolate North Korea, it traps people inside. But guess what's even more bizarre? North Korea has beaches and coastal areas that could be tourist destinations, but they are completely undeveloped. The East Coast has scenic mountains that drop into the Sea of Japan, and the West Coast has tidal flats and islands. In any other country, this coastline would be filled with resorts, ports, and cities. But North Korea's coastline is mostly empty because the government prioritizes military control over economic development. The few coastal cities that exist, like Wonsan on the East Coast, are heavily restricted. Wonsan has beaches and a natural harbor, and Kim Jong-un has tried to develop it as a tourist resort for wealthy North Koreans and Chinese visitors. But the project has stalled repeatedly because North Korea does not have the money, resources, or international relationships to build modern infrastructure. Geography gave them potential, but politics destroyed it. Now here is where North Korea's geography gets tragic. The country sits on valuable mineral resources. North Korea has deposits of coal, iron ore, magnesite, zinc, copper, and rare earth elements worth trillions of dollars. The mountains that make farming impossible are full of minerals that could make North Korea wealthy. But international sanctions, lack of technology, and isolation mean these resources mostly sit untouched or are mined inefficiently. And you know what is insane? South Korea has almost the same geography, mountains, limited farmland, and a long coastline. Yet South Korea became one of the world's richest countries, while North Korea stayed impoverished. The difference is not geography, it is politics, economics, and international relationships. Geography created challenges for both countries, but South Korea overcame them, while North Korea did not. The climate makes everything worse. North Korea has brutally cold winters and hot, humid summers. The country sits in a monsoon zone, which means heavy rains in summer that cause flooding and droughts in other seasons. Agriculture depends on those monsoons. When the rains fail or arrive too hard, crops fail and people starve. The 1990s famine killed hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, partly because bad weather combined with failed economic policies. And here is something that will blow your mind. North Korea is so mountainous and forested that there are areas the government does not fully control. Remote mountain regions are home to small communities that operate semi-independently because they are too isolated for the government to monitor effectively. These areas are basically forgotten by Pyongyang, surviving on subsistence farming and barter economies. Geography created pockets of escape from state control. But the most bizarre geographic fact about North Korea? The country is visible from space at night because of how dark it is. Satellite images show South Korea lit up with cities and infrastructure, while North Korea is almost completely black except for a small glow from Pyongyang. The lack of electricity, development, and infrastructure is so extreme that geography and politics combined have created a country that looks uninhabited from space. North Korea's geography explains why the country is isolated, why it cannot feed itself, why escape is nearly impossible, why development is limited, and why the government maintains such extreme control. Mountains trap people inside. Limited farmland creates dependency on the state. Borders are natural barriers, reinforced by military force. The political system exploits every geographic advantage to maintain power. Geography did not make North Korea a dictatorship. but it made the dictatorship easier to maintain and harder to escape. Which geographic fact surprised you most? Drop it in the comments.